give you an idea, the Brits alone are poised to spend about 61.8 billion on home improvement. Coming soon. So it just gives you an idea that a lot of people now want to stay in their properties. They obviously want to renovate them or expand them, etc. And I think the places like B&Q and Wix and various other people are going to do very well out of this, from while people are trying to spend money. But also then we have to look at the city centre. Birmingham's turning into a big skyscraper. To change its skylines. We know there's been relevant ones have been approved while we've been in this lockdown as well. And if we look at it, the latest one at the Irish Centre, 454 city centre apartments. They're going to be very small. Do we need to see a change? Do we need to see more green space appearing and larger apartments rather than gyms and cinema rooms, for example? Because obviously people staying in the city want more. And also, what are we going to see on the commercial sector? Is it completely knackered now with what's happened and it's never going to come to back? Or are we actually going to see more being given to employees and a better working environment? So, first of all, let me go to Clive, because obviously he's the wheeler and dealer and making sure that the legal points are all put together on here. So Clive, is there actually still money going around Birmingham to do these deals or not?
Yes, surprisingly so, I think. I think what's different between this situation that we're in and what we found ourselves in say 2007, 2008 is that the banks are okay and the banks are open for business, and there is money flowing around. There's the emergency funds that are flowing in terms of trying to support businesses, but there's also there's still an appetite for development. So we're acting for developers across the country. So we're doing things in the West Country, we're doing things in London, we're doing things in Birmingham and in the North. And I think what people find frustrating is that people want to do things, but I think the dislocation we've all had over the last few weeks has sort of slowed some things down. Yes, it will stop some things, I think, but others, people are still keen to do things. So we're seeing housing developments of all sort of scales and sizes. So some regional developers are looking at sort of a dozen apartments. Then they're looking at 350 unit sort of housing schemes in the southwest. Biggest city centre, skyline, high-rise developments, and then I think the commercial side will trundle along. And yes, it will look different, and we can come back to the sort of what an office space might look like. But I think people are still keen to do things, and I think and the housing market as well. I mean, that's good news that. The 450,000 transactions which have been sort of put on hold, people still want to either renovate their houses or sort of move onwards and upwards in the ladder. And the one comment that I heard the other day on a similar session was a barrister saying that having spent sort of 8 weeks in lockdown with his family, he worked out he actually needed more space to sort of almost escape from the kids. so I think people are sort of being forced to sort of be perhaps a bit more honest about what they want and probably what they don't want.
Oh, definitely. And I think it's interesting what you said there, because I've said recently, we are going to see a big change, especially on the residential housing market, because people are either going to want to get more space, they're going to upgrade, or they're going to extend. On the flip side, they're going to be divorced because they can't get on anymore in the same household because for various reasons. So they're obviously going to split the assets, or on the same, or they just want to get out. They might want to downsize. You've obviously got the flip side that people live in big properties and they don't need all that space. It's become lonely because they haven't got visitors. So it is going to be some interesting times. I want to pick up on the commercial element there. So Chris Kay, you're sat in the Spaces office at the moment. So do you think they're going to have to see some big changes, for example, in the way that they're operating? Because obviously, on a serviced office scheme, effectively, there could be some, people are in and out all day. There's hot desking going on, really great offices, don't get me wrong, but are we going to see a big change, do you think? Or do you think they've actually got the right way to move forward?
I think we've seen a little bit of both already, actually, James. We've got to a point with some clients where they're starting to look at co-locality. with mitigation of risk by spreading people across multiple locations. So in the event of infection coming into an office, then they don't see a big change in their ability to trade. So we've seen a lot of our bigger clients in the city have spreading across 6-7 locations. We're already afoot with some clients around how we can implement better social distancing measures via rather than having one big office, having multiple small offices. We're also seeing clients looking to have more space per person to enable them to effectively socially distance in the workplace. But on top of that, we might even see, excuse me, but there is some socially distanced table tennis going on in the background. I don't know if you can hear it. It just started as this call started. But I think at the same time, what we're also starting to see is perhaps a change of the way that people have a desk layout set up, because we've gone very much from a cubicle base over recent years to a more of a clear desk policy with lots of open plan desking for people. We're already starting to see orders and requests coming through for cubicles with the side panels on them. And so the way that people work, where people work, and how people work, I think will be changed for the foreseeable future. Just from conversations had this morning around office design, layouts, even post-COVID, starting to take a real leading edge as to how businesses are looking at constructing and utilizing, our services on demand and contracting quickly if they need to change with potential future infections or future peaks.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that. And Matt, for example, so I've been to your offices before, which are absolutely lovely. And it's interesting. I had the same conversation this morning with a colleague of mine who does provide the screens. And I thought as an employer, I'd rather my staff work from home rather than come in and be put into a little box. So Matt, what's your take on it? How do you think we're going to see the future of Birmingham change on that commercial side?
I think occupancy levels will certainly drop somewhat for sure. I think people have adapted very well to working from home, and that work-life balance has been great. We're actually getting inundated with requests right now for office redesign. We're looking at wayfinding, zoning, how to make spaces. I guess that psychological aspect is one of the main factors that are impacting people's return to an office environment. So we're considering all different factors, from how you enter the space to how you leave the space to how you get tea and coffee. All these elements have to be considered and factored. And thankfully, with flooring materials, we can enable that social distancing element quite quickly and quite impactful. So I think it's going to happen. It's going to continue for the next 12, 18 months. We're going to get these requests. I can't see it slowing down at all.
Well, no, but it's good. Then there's money coming back into the economy all the time here as well, and it gets better for employee welfare as well, which can only be a positive. Guy, what's all your take on this?
First, I've got a couple of things. I mean, in terms of property industry being open again, yes, I think it is open, but in terms of overall activity from an actual kind of transactional perspective, at the moment, my experience certainly has been that if any of our backers have been interested in bidding on anything, be it like an office or industrial or whatever retail parade, it's very much been at a discounted bargain basement price, that people aren't interested in paying a full price at the moment. It seems not for a development site, but for a let asset, and certainly I think there's a bit of from a sales perspective, we cancelled the sale of a couple of assets that we owned and asset management that I'm looking to dispose of. And I think what people don't want to do is feel that they might have missed out on the returns that they would have got by selling now rather than selling in 3 months. So I think there's going to be a dearth of kind of activity for the next few months, and then it'll very suddenly pick up as a few transactions happen. And I think confidence from sort of selling assets or people buying them is going to increase quite quickly. I think it's quite interesting that Chris, you're sat in a Spaces office, because I think one of the big things, certainly we'd heard that in terms of flexible workspace, it makes up about 3.5% of the square footage of office space in Birmingham. Birmingham's market is a little bit less mature, less populated in terms of having flexible operators in there, even though WeWork made up such a massive amount. But everyone seems to be everyone with a few people who've been working from home realise they can work from home. They've handed their 1 month or their 3 month notice in general. So I know for a fact that WeWork are in discussion with all their landlords and all their leases about reducing their footprint where practical. So I think we're going to see a big a number of centres closed, I suspect.
Yeah, I think looking at the WeWork situation, they're probably in a bit more trouble heading into this,
definitely. And way more overexposed to Birmingham as well.
Yeah, and more recently exposed as well, so they didn't have a chance to build up pre-COVID occupancy levels. But no, I think you're right. We have seen more terminations in the last 3 months than we would do in a normal 3-month period. I think that will be the same across the sector, across the industry. But a little bit, by no means massively, but a little bit that has been mitigated by some changing demand and some incremental demand from existing clients. So I don't think it'll balance off, but we won't necessarily lose as much as you might think. At least that's the kind of the view I have at the moment. It depends on how long it carries on for, I guess.
But also, I think we've found in a few kind of leasing conversations that we've been having, people haven't been wanting to commit to to say 5 years. So that's obviously a massive opportunity for anyone saying, oh, actually, well, if we can trade from service for 6 months, a year, that's perfect. Especially in the massive Crossroads building, of course.
Which is where I'm sat right now, which is fairly big. Yeah.
Sounds like no, but I think I recognise the HVAC system on the ceiling.
Well, we've definitely got some interesting times ahead. So, Chris Bolland, future of Birmingham. What's positive? What are we learning, and what can we get out of this?
We're obviously relatively new to this. We just partnered with Downtown in the last 2 months, and we're a strategic partner. And I said earlier, Birmingham's one of the cities that we're targeting for growth. So we work nationally, and we see trends across the UK. And one thing you mentioned earlier, which will be interesting, is how people reevaluate choice making, and therefore how that prioritizes things in some of the markets we operate in going forward. So what I mean by that is, if you take residential development, so we're currently developing schemes in Durham, London, the South Coast and Bath, as well as quite a few in Liverpool, sort of large-scale build-to-rent developments. And this is a sort of sector of the residential development market that's been maturing over a couple of years. What we're seeing now is a real push towards consumer-defined products. So climate emergency, I think, is going to become a bigger thing, and I think COVID will only accelerate that, because moments like this in history force people to reflect, and that then impacts choice. And so we've had years of statutory regulation trying to drive forward the change in construction and development to promote more sustainable development. Actually, the thing that's had the biggest impact is people choosing to buy products that are more sustainable than not, and that choice drives supply and demand. So the scheme we're looking at in Bath at the minute, the developer is progressing well above and beyond what's needed for building regulation approval, or even planning policy, which goes beyond building regulation limits, to provide something that effectively differentiates their scheme from the marketplace. And this in turn is being driven by their end investor, who will take the asset for the 30-year period. They'll hold it, whatever, and build it as part of their portfolio, because that end investor realizes that the sort of market of 20-somethings, or the people who are at sixth form now, who will go through university and come out and want to rent these properties by the time they're built, this will be hot on their agenda. And so that's a really interesting thing that we've seen sort of grow, and I think COVID will accelerate that. The sustainability and climate crisis agenda will really influence what we're going to do over the coming years. It'll be interesting to see with projects like the Commonwealth Games, which will no doubt really start to champion a response to the climate emergency. How that then starts to change the kind of local feeling for that, and how it starts to influence what spin-off development happens around it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And hopefully, fingers crossed, the Commonwealth will still be going ahead in 2022 and not be overshadowed by the Olympics. Yeah. So obviously, we've got to keep praying for that. But I want to pick up that, because it's really important on that, because I think when you've got your residential housing developments, and obviously Andy Street's been very big on getting the brown sites sort of regenerated, and you're lucky you've got a garden, you can get out. So during lockdown, it's tough for everybody, but you have got a garden, you can get out and you can enjoy the sun. If you're in a small, let's take a one-bed apartment in the city centre here in Birmingham, Birmingham, average will be about 420 to 470 square foot. You know, you haven't got a lot of space. And this is where the difference is kicking in. And are we going to see that difference now from developers? And as you say, is it, if it's for their end user or because they've seen this, and the choice is going to be different? You know, I'm a developer and I also have an estate agency. And if I've got the estate agency hat on when I walk in, I think, oh God, it would just be nice if this was a bit bigger, you know, and you could actually have a desk in here in the bedroom so you could work from it. You don't just trip over the wardrobe on it, you know, or in the living room, but also green space within the areas, you know, have, you know, some, you know, if we've got staggered rooftops rather than great big tall skyscrapers, where's the garden space? For the guys in the serviced offices probably won't want me to say this, but are we going to see a different from developers now where, and the planners will want to see work floors kicking in? So if people are in lockdown, and this does happen again, which is likely in the next 10 years, that there is actually an area they can work from within the development itself. And they've got their own little offices, and that might come into force all of a sudden. So I think we are going to see some interesting changes. On a developer hat on, it's all about you squeeze them in. You know, and it's all about your end return because it depends on who you're acting for. So there is going to be a big difference. But I think if we're looking at the future of Birmingham, I think it's very exciting. I think there is going to be some changes from this. And if we had to look at it, what do you think of changes that are needed now, though, that need to come in very quickly rather than wait 3 or 4 years? Let's get them in now and let's get pushing forward to make it a much better place. So who wants to go first? Kathy.
Well, I've got a couple of ideas. I think from Birmingham City Centre's perspective, I think if we can look to, you know, having cycled in the last couple of weeks, make the city centre more accessible to and safer for people to get into work using different means. So, you know, I know the government have talked a lot in the last week or so about bringing in more cycle routes, and I can see that starting to potentially shape the way that people will look to commute going forward. You know, there's far more cycle to work schemes and things like that, but I would be interested to see any plans that are going through with more green space planning for the city, because it seems like everything that's going up, as you said, you know, all the developments that I can see and the things that I read in the press and on social media are for more skyscrapers, more big space like that is very much lent to what's happened in the run-up to coronavirus, as opposed to how I feel genuinely the world will change beyond it. Okay,
perfect. Kathy, what are you thinking about all this?
Oh, the very fact that I might have to cycle to work horrifies me. I think they should just put more carriages on the trains as a solution. Not everyone lives within a distance where you can walk and cycle. Not everyone has physical attributes that allows that. Otherwise, you're ignoring large parts of you know, the working population. In terms of Birmingham, I think that we've been generally going okay in terms of how it's been launching itself and, you know, finally being recognised as a proper city where development takes place. In terms of the wider business, you know, unfortunately there's got to be some clear decisions being made about housing delivery. And a lot of that's going to have to be led by prices, costs, values, and landowners getting a realistic valuation of their land, which then informs densities and coverage. Right now, you're not going to get any larger houses on strategic land, in my opinion. You're going to get the houses that are churned out because that's what the land value dictates and what people can afford.
Yeah, no, it's interesting what you said there. And I think it's, you know, if you live in a warmer country, for example, then you probably don't mind the smaller property because you're going to spend most of your life outdoors. But when you're in a country that typically rains most of the year, you know, you do need larger properties to be able to relax, and especially if you've got young families.
But then again, James, that hasn't changed overnight. The only issue that's changed is that everyone's inside. The schools are closed, you can't go to the park. So unless the schools are going to stay closed forever, unless our parks are going to be closed forever, realistically, I think suddenly imagining that our houses are going to, you know, increase in size is unrealistic. I think it's going to be about how we use our space and how we make sure that we can go to work I don't think working from home and working in, as individuals is a good concept. It's not a good concept for my team, because it means the junior people within my team will never learn. They won't be given work. They won't learn from people, which you do as a team and through knowledge in an office. And I think that we'll see that as a real sort of levelling off of junior staff, because you won't be able to progress. You won't be able to get in front of a client. You won't be able to go to meetings. You won't be given senior work to do, because you won't have that same tutelage that you have in an office environment.
Yeah, listen, it's going to be very different. And I think for the future of Birmingham, I think the tech scene is going to be huge, and really to see what comes out of this. And, I know it picked up on the bike. And I think, Chris, you said you're a cyclist. I'm a cyclist myself. And I think I'm going to come on to transport, because I think it is an important one with the latest news that's just been coming out from the local councillors about how we get into Birmingham. But I also do think, look, within the UK, we can be relatively lazy as people, where we don't do anything until we're forced to do it, when we're so reliant on the car now as well. And I think the difference is, if you look at London, and if Birmingham wants to be recognised as a major player now in the world, we've got the companies coming in, the blue chips are starting to arrive. They need to get the public infrastructure really changed to allow people to get in no matter what. And if that means putting cycle routes down everywhere, then people will come because they feel safe. I don't like cycling down the Hagley Road, for example, or different areas and playing deaf with all the cars. But then you go on the cycle routes and you feel good, straight away, and you can take your time. And maybe we have to stop rushing, and this will be the future of Birmingham, that we actually just slow down slightly and we give more. So I want to ask a very controversial question now. It's in the press the past few days. Should have estate agents open back up for business? Yes or no?
Yeah, I don't see why not.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm quite strong behind this, because I'm sure we all have elderly relatives and family members and friends and so on and so forth that we can't see during this period. So, my mum can sell her house and invite as many people into the house as she likes to view it, but she can't engage her family for a 15-minute chat. It seems to contradict the ruling. So, it may be a little controversial, my response, but it's more personally driven than perhaps, from a business standpoint. But if you look at it from that aspect, then how can that make sense?
Well, I think the government has been clear, hasn't it, in terms of trying to set up the social distancing rules. So it's going to be pretty tightly controlled. Interestingly, I'm in the process of trying to move house with my other half, so that's been sort of put on hold. And one of the responses from our seller was actually she was going to do nothing until the government sort of said, right, okay, you can now go out and look for, and she's actually looking for a rented property. But I think as long as people are sensible, and the agents generally seem to be gearing up for this in terms of PPE, trying to do as much as they can online, and making it as safe an environment as is possible, then I think we need. The trouble is we need to get the economy moving again. We can't just stay in a permanent state of lockdown or semi-lockdown for any length of time. One, the country can't afford it financially, and I don't think the country can afford it from a sort of welfare and a well-being perspective. So I think the more we can do to sort of keep things moving, and housing is a big part of the economy. So I'm all for it.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because obviously stamp duty accounts for about £9 billion to the Treasury. So it'll soon start paying some furlough payments. But Matt Hall, what are you thinking?
No, I agree. I think it's all about being adaptable in a situation like this. So my wife, as an example, she's a property investor. She had a property that just before lockdown happened, some tenants moved out of one, and she managed to refill it by doing a virtual tour. So I think, in circumstances like this, surely adhering to social distancing is the right thing to do at all costs. But if you can adapt your business to also be visible virtually, I think that also plays into the hands of what's happening right now as well.
No, that's an interesting point. Chris Holland?
Yeah, no, Totally agree. And it's sort of, I guess, you think the strategy for restricting movement in society has been to prevent overloading of the NHS. It's not been to prevent the spread of the disease, because you can't prevent the spread of the disease unless you force everybody to stay in the house and not leave their house at all, which is sort of akin to what was done in Italy. So the tactic, and it's misrepresented, and the agenda for it is misrepresented, but it is what it is. It's spreading very quickly. The strategy is to try and limit the damage that spread does. But as people have said, that's not an indefinite. You cannot maintain that that position until a vaccine is available and distributed and proven to be effective over a long period of time, because there won't be anything to pick up by the time that's all done. So we, as Matt says as well, we have to adapt. We have to find a way to move forward. The travel industry found a way to deal with the raised threat after 9/11, and that changed fundamentally the entire industry. And okay, so that was an event that affected really one sector, and this is affecting all of our businesses and all of our sectors. But it is a self-imposed position. We are in a economic sort of event that is caused by the imposition of social restriction for the good of society. So once that there is a feeling that there is control back into the situation, which I think we're at now, then it is right that we start to return safely as we can under those new circumstances to get things moving again. Otherwise, there will be long-term damage done that will be worse than the original problem.
And it's interesting what you're picking up there, Chris, as well, because if you're representing developers who are building housing developments, for example, a key part of them is to Part X, and you need the estate agents open to get around the houses to get them valued and get them sold. Otherwise, the people aren't going to be buying new houses unless you're first-time buyers only, and that means that the market can come to a bit of a stall as well. So, interesting. Guy, any thoughts on this?
I almost completely agree with Chris, to be honest with you. I would actually have, and again, possibly a good reason I'm not in government, but I would have opened all the other essential shops as well. Maybe not hairdressers and beauticians, but I don't see why they shouldn't also be open, especially when non-essential deliveries from Amazon can be open. Maybe if they had a policy of if you are fall in one of the vulnerable groups, you can remain furloughed whilst the business restarts. So I don't know if that would work better, but yeah, I think personally that the government has underestimated the extent to which people would lose confidence and feel afraid of going kind of back out into public, which has now, as we've seen with some of the, or you might think we've seen with some of the objections to the schools reopening. For example, there's a real palpable sense of nervousness, I think, about non-essential things reopening generally, which is only going to kind of impact the speed at which things get moving again.
Yeah, but then again, a lot of the schools haven't closed.
Yeah, so exactly.
They're never closed. It's only because people kept their children at home that they perceive.
Well, most schools were told that they had to stay open for key workers.
Yeah.
What you find is what that ended is between the head teachers of the local areas, they got together to say, look, there's no point in having every school open to have 5 or 6 kids in there. And what they would do is use one school as a hub, and then the teachers would obviously then rotate round to help on there, which it's obviously to keep things going. The key thing will be for June. And it's interesting why I asked this question, because there's a couple of big brand names out there. I'm not going to mention which names, but if people want to know, just look in the media, you'll find them. And they've refused to open at the moment, which is then interesting. Why? Because they've sort of sleptwalk into this. Pretty much everybody in the estate agency world knew that they were going to be one of the first to be allowed to open the doors. But then they haven't opened. And when you're talking about schools, for example, we're also at a time now where parents are going to be having to make that decision on what schools they want their children to go to. So for year 6, for example, you're going to be getting into high schools, and they're going to want to make sure that they're moving into catchment areas as well. And if you're stuck with an agent who's not open, in essence, then you're going to be stuck. You could be left high and dry, effectively. So I think what we are starting to see is the independents in Birmingham are starting to be able to push forward now and really showcase a bit of a difference. And Birmingham's always had that bit of entrepreneurial drive, which would be quite interesting to see. Just picking up what you said there, Guy, it's interesting about about Amazon, because I've not heard one complaint yet about Amazon not paying enough tax in the UK in the last 8 weeks. So
No, exactly.
everyone's really, really fortunate for them. So at least they use recyclable packaging. That's the good thing. So on the 14th of May, so only a few days ago, there were some big plans released all about the future of Birmingham itself, very much into the transport hubs. It's something that's got me a little bit, because obviously we were all waiting for the clean air zone to come in. It got delayed again. People were rushing out buying electric cars. I was one of them, to make sure that I wasn't going to get charged every day. Now I didn't actually need it now for about another year. And they've come out with this emergency plan to keep clean air and everything after we come out of this. But are we impressed with it? I don't know if you've seen it. And they're on about using parking spaces on the roads and actually just putting barriers outside to make bigger walking areas, a little bit more outdoor space. Cycle routes, they're sort of talking about it again to say we want to get more people cycling, but there's no real big plans. There's no real deciders of what's going to happen. Most of the ones that have been talked about have been getting talked about for years. And I'm worried on this that it's a bit of a marketing ploy from the council to look good and say, look, we're going to do this. But are we acting quick enough? Should this be an emergency, or should somebody higher up be saying, you know what, this is a great opportunity now to change the city centre especially, and the suburban areas that are just as important to link into the centre, and actually, rather than making this an emergency plan, let's actually grab our balls and make it better, and let's start showing Birmingham can lead this way forward. I know Andy Street's been talking about Birmingham's going to be trying electric scooters and be one of the trial pads for the UK, but you can't use them anywhere. So what's the point of being the trial? So what are your thoughts on this, Chris Kay?
Oh, I thought you come to me first. Well, I said it already.
Chris Bowen, but he was drinking at the time. So
coffee break there.
Yeah, I think I've probably made my thoughts quite clear already. I think if we're going to lead the way and we're going to drive some public sentiment behind the plan, now's the time to do it. And, if we could get on the back of the return to work, the sentiment that seems to be out there, looking at speaking to people from social media, listening to people talking in the news, there is a great sentiment to change how we live our lives and to change how we view getting to work, how we view working, how we view socializing, how we view interacting. And by having a really in-depth, detailed plan as to how to evolve the connections around the city, how to evolve how people get around the city, and how people can live and breathe and work around and in and around the city. Anything that's, how can I put this, but anything that's not really well thought through at this point in time, and you've already mentioned perhaps rehashing some old plans. I think we need to have something that's leading the way that other cities can use as a benchmark for, and we've got probably the best opportunity that we've ever had with all of the change that's going on in Birmingham right now to make a change for the future that other cities can look at as a blueprint to deliver the perfect or ideal city centre environment for people who use it.
Absolutely. So you're saying that it shouldn't be an emergency one, it should be more permanent, and rather than putting just little barriers up, actually extend the pavements, or get the cycle lanes down and start spending the money where it should be spent. Interesting. Matt?
Well,
Yeah, I think
it is happening in the city centre though. If you think about the proposals for commrcial and the other major works that are sort of like in the pipeline, it takes a long time to reroute roads and get people's approval and tie in with pedestrian routes especially. So I don't think the city centre is necessarily behind. I mean, Birmingham's really lucky that it is really walkable. You don't need cycles and scooters to get around. You can just walk to Brindley Place. You can just walk from Snow Hill to Broad Street. It's not that far. Whereas London, Liverpool, Manchester, some of the distances are much longer. So I think Birmingham's, it's got that benefit. I think the City Council's attempts to, do social distancing, make footpaths wider, that's an emergency aspect that they're doing. I don't know. Since I started my company, I've got the train into Birmingham every day for work. And the only thing that's prevented that is a change in the rail company and reduced carriages. So Birmingham's already got a very, very sustainable system of public transport, which they're improving through the tram and more bus routes and such. I'm not quite sure how minimising roads and alienating cars completely will benefit every person.
I don't think it'll benefit everybody, but it's an interesting one of how city centres do have to change, and this is where the future could be. And I think if we're going to be the hub of trialling, even though I'm a cyclist myself, let me honest, I don't want to put Lycra on every day to cycle up to the office. Quite happy to jump on an electric bike though in my suit, and that's straightforward. So maybe we have to learn. Israel, Tel Aviv is a great place to see this. Yes, different climate, but if anyone's not been, everyone's on scooters and electric bikes over there, and they get around for work everywhere, which I think is the difference. I think the key thing for me, just for Birmingham, and obviously being in the property here, it's so important. I think we have 2 bike lanes that took years in place. They only got put in place after a tragic accident that pushed it through. And I think we do need to push it forward now more and more to get people out. One thing this has done is got people out the houses. So we were a nation that you are locked in your house. As soon as you get home, you're in, TV's on, sit down, have your tea, have a chat, go to bed, where now everyone's getting out and about. And I think that's really important. It's been great to see families, going down on their bikes and they're feeling safe, and we're going to see more of it. Matt, what's your take on how the transport could be good or bad, or what you like on?
I've lived in the Middle East for the last 4 years, so I only got back to the Midlands last year. And I saw a massive transformation over the last 12 months, to be honest. I think it's been incredible how Birmingham has developed in the 4 years that I was away. I would just like to see better connectivity between certain regions, communities, people. Certainly how they interact better across the city would be something that I would be looking at. And I think in the interim period, one of the biggest factors that we need to look at is just safety. For me, is how people are getting around, and that safety element, because I think more so than ever, people want to feel comfortable walking around, cycling around, whatever mode of transport you're going to be on. I think that's a really important factor for the future of Birmingham. And they could lead the way with it. We've seen all the press about what's happening in London right now with transport across London. We don't want to go down that route for sure.
No, absolutely, and I think you've just hit a key point there. We always hear it's always London first, pretty much. Why doesn't Birmingham take the headlines and really just grab it and go for it and make a big change? Clive, what are you thinking?
I think what concerns me is the connectivity, and I think for the mood music has been, car equals bad. Up until sort of 2-3 months ago. Now we're being told don't get on public transport, jump in your car, and the social. So there needs to be a proper joined up view in terms of what is safe, what is recognised as being sort of usable. And I think just penalising the car use for the sake of it is not the way to go. The talk about we're going to have I agree with clean air. I think the city council is just being is sort of pandering to the mood music at the moment, and I think what they need is a proper realistic solution. If you think about the numbers of people who come into Birmingham each day, it is we need a joined up model. We need a good public transport system. I'm a regular train user. It's been awful, absolutely awful. That needs. So I'm pleased that Andy Street has been on at the train companies to try and make that work. But if we're in a sort of post-coronavirus world, are we going to have getting people to wear masks on public transport? If that's the new normal, I'm happy to do that. It doesn't actually bother me getting on a train. It wouldn't stop me getting on a train tomorrow. But what would stop me getting on a train tomorrow is the thought that actually with the numbers, it might take me 3 hours to actually get on a train to get home. That's not a solution. So I can see there'll be partial answers to all of this. Part of which will be, we'll probably be working from home 1-2 days a week, maybe for the foreseeable future. And I think it's things like connectivity in terms of Zoom and everything else that will make a difference. So we will probably see a reduction, I think, in travel per se. the big sort of meetings here, there, and everywhere people will be thinking, do I really need that meeting? Yes, there will be times when you need that meeting, but probably, as we've seen with the technology here, you can do a lot of things online.
So it's interesting you say that, Clive, because then effectively what we're saying is then the car will not need to be used that much then if we're working from home.
I don't think it will be needed as much, but to demonise it and just say you've got to use public transport and then tell you in the next breath you can't get on public transport because of social distancing, that's not realistic.
No, it's very true. And it doesn't matter if you're yellow, red or blue on your political thoughts. It was the same with diesel cars. Everyone was told to buy diesel and now everyone's told to go and buy electric. So it's changed. Guy, you were nodding your head through that. So what are your thoughts?
I mean, I completely agree that I think the sort of vilification of car users has very much been pandering to the mood music. I think, as I'm sure, I think I've read a few studies found that as soon as you put in a clean air zone, say diesel cars, all that does is not really affect but mildly inconvenience effectively, reasonably middle and high earners, middle class people. And what it does is actually really puts a strain on people who can't afford to just go and get a new electric car, or people who have to drive in, maybe they've got kids or whatever. And, I think also the bus system really needs examining. I mean, I guess it's 2.1 on the buses and trains. You can't tell people, especially more professionals, I would say, to, you should be commuting using these services when actually the use of them is poor, if not actively unpleasant. My boss lives in Harborne, which probably says exactly as you'd expect. And he actually gets the bus, and a lot of his mates take the piss out of him. But actually, I used to get the bus in from Moseley, and that was just a terrible experience throughout. It was often or always cramped. The rest of the people on there, often, there'd be a very small number of people making the journey, pretty much hell for everyone. So I think they need to actually find a way of, investing in, whether that's with more personnel on the buses or whatever, of improving that experience so people are encouraged to use it because it is a viable alternative. And the other thing I think is just they need to really focus on infrastructure. And I know that in our country, it seems that delivery of even local infrastructure projects does take an enormous amount of time. I know there's an endless list of reasons for that, but we do seem to be pretty shit at it, to be honest. Excuse the language, but we just seem to be terrible at it. So I think with the metro plans need to go much further, and that just unlocks so much investment. On the Hagley Road, for example, Seven Capital just spent quite a few million updating one of the office buildings that's directly outside of the stop. That whole area, the New Garden Square that Calthorpe Estates are putting in there, which is 5 large office buildings, 200 or 300 flats and a hotel building that's opposite that wouldn't really be happening without that, I wouldn't have thought, or not to that scale. So infrastructure unlocks investment from other parts of the country, money from other parts of the country into Birmingham. So it just needs to be sort of accelerated as much as possible.
Yeah, Guy, listen, I can only echo your thoughts there. It's one thing, with developing in a different city and then operating a business here is I do see the difference in speed on the way some cities really want to accelerate and get things done. And we do seem to be a little bit slow here, but hopefully this will start to change. What are your thoughts then, Chris?
Sort of general agreement, especially with Guy's point about timing on infrastructure projects. It's just crazy. Birmingham has a real opportunity, doesn't it? Because it is going to become a hub for the country. Notwithstanding the reporting in the last couple of days on the quality of management, but HS2 is going to have a big impact. And that presents a really exciting opportunity to really revisit the whole transport agenda. And it needs to be strategic. The issues are complex and interwoven with the fabric of cities and the nature of society. We aren't all going to just suddenly abandon our cars and jump onto bikes. We aren't all going to be able to just go out and buy electric cars. But the certainty in all of this is that we're going to run out of oil in the future, and that's it. It will get to the point where we can no longer fuel vehicles with that means. So we need to put measures in place now to change that. And I think generationally, there's a big shift away from dependency on cars. Less so perhaps outside of urban centres, but certainly in urban centres. Younger generations are just not interested in car ownership or don't see it as a barrier. You know, my own younger brother, who's 20 years younger than me, is a case in point, and his whole cohort, friends, colleagues, people he works with, people who live with, just none of them own cars. None of them see it as a barrier to their lifestyle. If they need to get somewhere, they rent a car, they use car share schemes. It's just a massive shift in attitude away from, you know, my generation, which is that if I don't have my car, I feel like I'm, you know, I feel like I've had my left leg chopped off, like you know, I'm completely lacking independence and all the rest of it. It's just a completely different mindset, and I think we're going to see, like I said earlier, how the change in what people want to make choices will dictate what supply provides. So that shift in attitude will change how we depend on vehicles in city centres. How developments that come forward will not be car focused in the way that they have been in the past or they are now. So, but you know, the things like the HS2 project provide a springboard to start to raise a debate around the future of a city like Birmingham, about how it embraces what you know, a transport agenda could look like that isn't dependent on fossil fuel based transport systems.
Interesting comments, Chris. I've just had a message to say it's only on till 3. But
Yeah, I've got to go.
So since you've mentioned HS2, I'll just leave you this little thought then, because I never like people to agree on my calls. So why don't we just scrap HS2 and use that money to go into the local metro system and then get everyone connected together? Yes or no?
No.
Interesting.
Doing both.
No.
Plus, you need to. The other thing, though, the argument few people make about HS2 is the fact that we need to keep that sort of institutional knowledge as a country of highly technical rail work for future projects, so we're not reliant on other countries to bring that expertise in.
Mm.
You mentioned the connectivity straight away. What are your thoughts? Connect to London or get the West Midlands connected?
100%. I'm all for connecting to London as well. I think that's HS2 for me.
Okay, Kathy.
I didn't really hear the question, but I think HS2 is going to happen to Birmingham. Whether it happens any further, I don't know.
Clive?
Yeah, I think it brings opportunities, both sort of heading towards London and also potentially going north. It's got to be a good thing. The management's a nightmare, but yeah, the concept is good.
I think we all probably have some link or relationship with something to do with HS2 right now. I know to your point, 100% the management can be difficult. I think it's critical to the region. I think it'll help us retain the best people. And that's really important, you know, retaining the best and brightest of Birmingham's minds, because they can connect to London quickly. Keep those people in the city. It's hugely important for the future.
Perfect. Chris Bolland, you're obviously pro HS2. My thoughts are very much to scrap it, get it connected the metro into Birmingham. Do Zoom meetings if you've got to do a meeting in London now. We've just shown the new way on here, so it's very different. So, guys, many thanks.
I'm still going to be going to London.
Many thanks for joining us.
I don't like Zoom that much.
No problem. Thanks very much for joining us. Another edition of the Birmingham Property Club in association with the Downtown Den. Been great having you all, and I'm sure I'll see you very soon on another edition. Thank you, guys.